She had everything to be happy, but something was still missing. Chapter 1: The picture-perfect life everyone envied. From the outside, it looked like she had it all. Victoria's social media was a carefully curated highlight reel. A high-paying job in a sleek corporate building, vacations in picturesque destinations, a beautiful apartment in the heart of the city, and a group of friends who always seemed to be laughing in every photo. To her family, she was the success story, the one who had made it. Colleagues admired her ambition and discipline, and strangers would often comment on how lucky she must feel to live such a life. But behind the closed doors of her apartment, the reality was far quieter and far heavier. The joy in those photographs was often posed, the laughter rehearsed. Each new achievement that was supposed to feel like a victory quickly faded into the background, replaced by an unshakable sense that something was missing. First, she brushed it off as stress, telling herself that once she got a promotion, bought a better apartment, or booked another trip, the feeling would disappear. But it didn't. No matter how much she checked off her list of goals, the emptiness crept back in, quietly but persistently. It was like living in a beautiful house where every room was perfectly decorated, but the foundation was hollow. This was the paradox of her life. She had the version of happiness that the world celebrates, but not the kind that her heart recognized. And it was only a matter of time before the cracks in that perfect image began to show. Chapter 2: The subtle signs of an inner void. It started in ways so small that Victoria barely noticed them at first. A lingering restlessness after dinner with friends, a strange heaviness in the mornings despite a full night's sleep, moments where she'd stare out the window at work and wonder why she felt disconnected from her own life. She would find herself in meetings, nodding at the right moments, speaking when expected, yet internally drifting somewhere else entirely. The voice in her head would ask, "Why doesn't this feel enough? Why do I feel like I'm living someone else's version of my life?" These weren't dramatic breakdowns or obvious signs of crisis. They were quiet, persistent ripples under the surface. The weekends, which once felt like a reward, began to lose their magic. She'd scroll endlessly through social media, comparing her life to others, yet feeling oddly detached even from her own accomplishments. Sometimes she'd return from a night out feeling more drained than before she left, like she'd spent hours playing a role that wasn't truly hers. Her closest friends noticed subtle changes. She laughed a little less freely, her eyes seemed distant, and her answers to "How are you?" became shorter, more rehearsed. But Victoria brushed off their concerns, convincing herself she was just tired or going through a phase. Deep down, though, she recognized the truth. This wasn't just a passing mood. It was a quiet signal from within, warning her that the life she was living wasn't aligned with the life she truly needed. And ignoring it was becoming harder each day. Chapter 3: Chasing the Wrong Definition of Happiness. Victoria had always believed that happiness was a checklist, a formula you could follow if you worked hard enough and stayed disciplined. Graduate from a respected university. Land a stable job. Build a picture-perfect relationship. Travel to beautiful places. Fill your home with the right furniture and your closet with the right clothes. On paper, she had done it all. And yet, every time she reached a milestone she had once dreamed about, the rush of joy was fleeting. A promotion that should have felt like a triumph instead left her lying awake at night, wondering why it didn't change anything inside. A trip to an exotic destination became more about capturing the perfect photos than actually experiencing the moment. Even in her relationship, she sometimes caught herself acting out the role of the perfect partner, instead of showing up as her real, unfiltered self. Victoria began to realize that she had spent years chasing society's definition of happiness, one built on external markers and public approval. It was a kind of happiness that depended on applause, likes, and validation from others. Problem was, the more she achieved, the more she needed the next achievement to feel worthy. She wasn't truly pursuing joy. She was chasing a sense of enoughness that kept slipping just out of reach. The happiness she thought she was working toward wasn't rooted in authenticity, it was rooted in performance. And the more she performed, the further away she drifted from herself. This quiet, aching gap between the life she was supposed to want and the life her heart actually craved was beginning to widen. Something had to give. Chapter 4: The Moment of Awakening. It happened on an ordinary Sunday morning. Victoria was sitting in her living room, sunlight spilling through the window, sipping coffee from her favorite mug. The city was unusually quiet, and for the first time in a while there was no meeting to prepare for, no event to attend, no urgent email demanding her attention. She should have felt peaceful, but instead she felt an unsettling emptiness, as if she were a guest in her own life. Her phone buzzed on the table. A notification from social media. She picked it up without thinking and saw a post from an old college friend. The friend looked radiant, smiling in a candid photo with her family, captioned with a heartfelt message about gratitude and simple joys. Victoria didn't feel envy exactly. She felt something stranger, a pang of recognition that what her friend seemed to have wasn't perfection but presence. She sat there, phone in hand, replaying moments in her mind. Dinners with friends where she had been too distracted to listen, trips where the destination mattered more than the journey, achievements she celebrated publicly but never truly felt privately. For the first time, she questioned whether she had been living her life at all, or simply following a script she never wrote. The moment was quiet but seismic, a crack in the foundation of the story she'd been telling herself for years. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but rather the slow, unmistakable realization that the life she had built was missing the very thing she thought she was chasing: genuine fulfillment. It was then she understood something profound. She couldn't keep waiting for happiness to arrive in the form of the next accomplishment or milestone. If she wanted to feel truly alive, she would have to change how she was living now. Chapter 5: The Search for Meaning Beyond Success. After that quiet but life-altering Sunday morning, Victoria couldn't return to her routine without feeling the weight of that realization. Meetings felt emptier, small talk more hollow, and the applause she once sought began to sound distant, almost artificial. She noticed how, despite all her accomplishments, her life had become a carefully curated performance, one she was starring in but not truly experiencing. She started questioning the foundation of her success. Why had she worked so hard for these things? Was it for herself or to prove something to the world? The more she thought about it, the more she saw how much of her identity was tied to external validation. Praise from colleagues, admiration from acquaintances, and the polished image she maintained online, these were her fuel. But now that fuel felt toxic. Late at night, she began reading books and listening to podcasts about purpose, self-awareness, and the difference between achievement and fulfillment. Words from philosophers, spiritual leaders, and psychologists all seemed to echo the same message. Meaning doesn't come from the accumulation of trophies but from connection, contribution, and authenticity. Victoria also started noticing patterns in people around her. Some had far less material success but radiated a deep sense of peace and joy. Others, like her, had made it in every external sense but seemed quietly discontent. She realized she had been measuring her life with the wrong ruler, one calibrated to society's standards, not her own soul's needs. The more she peeled back the layers of her ambition, the more she uncovered a deep hunger, not for more accolades but for a life that felt aligned, intentional, and alive. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. It was going to be a journey. One that would require her to unlearn, to strip away, and to step into the unknown in search of something more real. Chapter 6: Moments of Vulnerability and Honest Conversations. Victoria didn't realize how exhausting it had been to keep up her flawless facade until she allowed herself to drop it for the first time in years. It happened unexpectedly, over coffee with her oldest friend, Clara. They were sitting by the window of a small cafe when Clara, who had known her since high school, leaned in and asked, "But are you happy?" That simple question broke something open inside her. Instead of answering with her usual rehearsed lines about being busy, grateful, and doing great, Victoria took a deep breath and said the truth. "No, I'm not happy. I don't even know what I'm chasing anymore." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and to her surprise, tears welled up in her eyes. Clara didn't try to fix her or give advice, she just listened. That was the first time in years Victoria felt truly seen. The relief was almost physical. It was as if the tight armor she had been wearing had suddenly loosened, allowing her to breathe more deeply. From that moment, Victoria started seeking more spaces where she could be raw and unfiltered. She began journaling without editing her thoughts, joined a small discussion group about personal growth, and reconnected with a cousin she had drifted away from, someone who had always been refreshingly honest about life's messiness. In these moments of vulnerability, Victoria began to understand something profound. Authenticity creates connection. By revealing her imperfections and doubts, she was no longer performing for an audience. She was sharing herself with people who cared. These conversations didn't magically erase her emptiness, but they gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging not for the role she played but for who she actually was. And that, she realized, was the foundation she needed to build whatever came next. Chapter 7. Shifting her focus from having to being. Victoria had always measured her life by what she had. The job title, the apartment, the travel photos, the curated experiences that made her Instagram feed look like a glossy magazine. But after those moments of vulnerability, she began to notice how hollow that checklist really was. One evening, while walking home from work, she paused in front of a small park she usually passed without a second glance. A group of kids were chasing each other around, laughing so hard they could barely breathe. A man sat on a bench playing guitar, his dog lying contently at his feet. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Instagram-worthy. But it felt alive. Victoria realized that in her quest to have more, she had forgotten how to simply be. She had been living in a constant forward tilt, always thinking about the next accomplishment, the next purchase, the next life milestone, without stopping to experience the present moment fully. The shift didn't happen overnight, but she started making small changes. Instead of eating lunch at her desk while replying to emails, she began sitting by a sunny window, tasting her food instead of inhaling it. She left her phone at home when she went for weekend walks, giving herself permission to notice the texture of the air, the sound of her footsteps, and the colors of the world around her. She also started asking herself a different question each morning. Not, what do I need to get done today, but how do I want to feel today? That small reframing brought her attention back to the state of her being instead of the size of her to-do list. Slowly, the anxiety that had been her constant companion began to loosen its grip. Victoria was no longer chasing life like a finish line that kept moving further away. She was inhabiting it, moment by moment, breath by breath, and discovering that fulfillment wasn't something she could own. It was something she could only live. Chapter 8. Embracing Gratitude and a New Definition of Happiness. Victoria's journey had taken her from restless striving to a quiet, grounded appreciation for life. But the final turning point came when she began practicing gratitude, not as a forced daily habit but as an intentional shift in perspective. First, it was simple. She started writing down 3 things she was grateful for each night before bed. Some days the list was ordinary. The smell of coffee in the morning, the warmth of her blanket, a good conversation with a friend. Other days it was more profound. The courage to speak her truth in a meeting, the resilience she'd shown during a hard week, or the realization that she was learning to enjoy her own company. The more she noticed the small, beautiful details of her life, the less she compared herself to others. Gratitude acted like a lens that softened the sharp edges of her perfectionism. It made her see that she already had enough, not in the sense of settling but in the deep understanding that enough is not a number, it's a state of mind. Victoria's definition of happiness shifted entirely. It was no longer tied to the next achievement, the next trip, or the next purchase. Happiness became about alignment, living in a way that matched her values, treating herself with kindness, and staying present for the moments that truly mattered. She realized she didn't need to be more to be worthy of joy. She didn't need to have it all figured out to feel fulfilled. In fact, she discovered that some of the most beautiful moments of life are imperfect, unpredictable, and fleeting. By embracing gratitude and redefining happiness, Victoria finally felt free. She was no longer chasing an illusion of perfection. She was living a real, imperfect, vibrant life. And for the first time, happy didn't feel like a destination. It felt like home.